In this video, I'm going to talk about how I made the Fog of War mod, the challenges I faced along the way, and the reason behind the extremely bizarre glitch we encountered. If you haven't already seen the original video, then I suggest you check that out now. This might get pretty technical, but I'll do my best to keep it interesting and explain things in as simple terms as possible. In Minecraft, empty space is represented by air blocks. My first idea was to simply give all air blocks a black texture to create the fog, and then use a custom untextured air block to represent explored areas. However, it turns out that air blocks in Minecraft are actually hard-coded to be invisible, so the fog texture never shows up. I tried overriding this behavior, but in the interest of compatibility, Forge, the modding framework that I was using, doesn't allow the behavior of vanilla blocks to be overridden. It's possible that a different modding framework would have been a better choice for a mod like this, but you know what they say? Unlike Eddie's eyesight,
this is what it's like being me in real life.
Hindsight is 20/20. In the end, I made my own air-like block, one that was not invisible, to represent the fog. Unfortunately, this meant that the fog had to be placed in the world programmatically, which would incur a performance cost. Replacing all air blocks with fog was way too slow, so I settled for generating a sphere of fog around each player. Here's where things start getting a little confusing. To prevent fog from generating in already explored areas, I needed a way to mark air tiles as being explored. So, I introduced another air variant to represent explored air. Every frame the mod generates a sphere of explored air around each player, and then replaces the layer of air tiles outside that sphere with fog. This means that as a player walks, they leave behind a tunnel of explored air. The next problem I encountered was to do with transparent blocks. Since the fog was only one block thick, any transparent blocks that intersected this fog sphere would effectively act as a window, allowing players to see through the fog to the outside world. This would happen with leaves, grass, flowers, and various other blocks. As a workaround, I made the fog several blocks thick. It's not a perfect solution, but it avoids the problem in most cases. Finally, everything seemed to be working. Except when it didn't. In some chunks, or rather some parts of chunks, fog just didn't seem to spawn. I checked and double-checked my code and everything seemed to be correct. So I dug deeper. Remember how fog is essentially just a variant of air? Well, it turns out when you ask Minecraft to set a block in the world to air, it actually does nothing at all if the subchunk is already 100% air. This makes sense if you think about it. Why bother converting air to air? As far as Minecraft was concerned, air and fog were the same thing. To fix this, I generated invisible marker blocks on the outside of the fog sphere. These marker blocks were not technically air, so they could be placed in any subchunk. And then since the subchunk was no longer 100% air, I could finally place my fog blocks. If this isn't making any sense, don't worry, it's not important. I just wanted to share my pain. Now for the trickiest part of all. Until now, the fog only generated in air, but if a player went underwater, their view was totally unobstructed. I had to do everything all over again, but for water this time. I created new blocks to represent water fog and explored water. And here's where I messed up. When you explore a water block, the mod replaces it with an explored water block. But the problem is how we define a water block in the first place. Instead of asking, is this block a water source, my code was actually asking, does this block contain water? If the answer was yes, that block would be replaced by a brand new explored water source. Do you see the problem? As each water source flows outwards, the neighbouring blocks are then also recognised as water, so they get replaced with an explored water source, and so on, until the entire world is flooded. The fix is simple, but the repercussions were, well, you've seen the video. If you made it this far, then thanks for listening to me ramble, and a special thank you to my very first and very generous patron. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe for more, and you can sponsor us on Patreon for as little as £1 a month.